Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. When it comes to shift work, it is no surprise that these kinds of schedules often fight circadian biology. We are all subject to a circadian rhythm. This is a biological rhythm of humans and other life forms, which is tied to things such as daylight and nighttime, a time when we are most alert and fully awake, versus a time when our bodies and our minds wind down and prepare for rest and repair, essentially sleep. But the reality of work sometimes includes schedules that go against circadian rhythms. This is when problems can arise. Not only does going against this circadian biology affect our bodies, our brains, but it also can affect performance and, by extension, our employer, the organization. When it comes to considering circadian rhythms, it's important to remember that although in general terms we are all governed by a similar rhythm, biological rhythm, there are personal differences. Some people tend to be morning people, other people tend to be night owls. This is more than a mere preference. This may very well be tied to one's personal biology, one's individual circadian rhythm or circadian biology. When the work schedule fights against this natural circadian biology, an individual can only perform at a certain level, certainly not at their best at all times or for an extended period of time. Eventually, when these circadian rhythms or biologies are fought against or are opposed by insisting on staying awake when the body wants to be asleep, not only are the body and the mind fatigued, performance suffers, and safety may very well become a concern as well. There is plenty of research that shows us that despite our best efforts, when we are in a state of sleep deficit, it's not possible to effectively catch up on sleep. And while, yes, a person may feel like they caught up on sleep, the damage that has been done by not getting enough sleep, by creating a sleep deficit, cannot be fully corrected. Shift work and circadian biology should be of great concern for both the individual but also for the employer. When going against personal circadian biology, not only will the individual experience physical effects and psychological effects, things such as mood or alertness or ability to perform to the same level that they may otherwise be able to perform, but things such as safety come into play as well. Moods and social interactions can become affected. So while this is of obvious concern for individual employees, the organization has a lot to lose when those things come into play. As an employer, you have to consider beyond productivity. Now we also have to consider things such as safety and the social environment of the organization, which may be affected by an individual's lack of sleep. And while sometimes people will naturally seek out night shift work if they are predisposed to be night owls, that's not always the case. In plenty of instances, people have to do night work or night shift work out of necessity or out of the insistence of their employer. The good news is that employers have a great deal of power to make things better, especially when shift work is a requirement. For some companies, shift work may be absolutely necessary. For others, it may simply be a tool for greater profitability. Whatever the case, the organization has a responsibility of making sure that shift work exists in such a way that both employee and employer can benefit or do as well as possible in the given circumstances. One way that employers can improve the shift work environment and experience is to provide rotating shifts, especially for those employees who would prefer day shifts over night shifts. This allows individuals to work on a rotating schedule so that they experience all 3 shifts, which is the typical breakdown, in a rotating manner. What's even more important when considering rotating shifts is the benefit of forward rotating shifts as opposed to backward rotating shifts, which can make things more difficult. Forward rotating shifts require that people transition from first shift to second shift to third shift. This is an easier transition on our biology, on the circadian biology for humans, as opposed to backward rotating shifts where one might go from first shift to third shift to second shift and back to first shift. That is much more difficult on our biology. So, as an employer considers rotating shifts, it makes much more sense to have forward rotating shifts. It's important that predictable patterns also exist within the workplace experience. This is why schedules are so important. Taking that one step beyond just regular scheduling pattern, when we engage in shift work, especially night shift, it's very important to establish a scheduling pattern to make it easier for the body when it's required for the individual to be out of sync with their circadian biology. Rotating shift work also allows individuals to have a protected window of recovery. This is especially important when individuals have to work the kind of shift work that goes against their natural circadian biology. A person who is not a night person having to work the night shift indefinitely can be incredibly taxing on the biology and psychology of the individual. An employer will do well to offer forward rotating shift work as a way of establishing recovery windows for the individual employee. Something else to consider for shift work, especially for evening and night shifts, are things such as lighting. There has to be proper lighting, not only so that the individual can see, but also that the environment promotes being awake rather than winding down and going to sleep. At the same time, it's important that the lighting isn't so bright or so harsh beyond what is required for the exact working environment that it is tiring to those who have to be in that lighting or work in that kind of lighting. So while we don't want lighting that's too dim, there is such a thing as lighting that is too bright or too harsh for the workplace experience. Employees may require things such as caffeine breaks, and those need to be timed properly. In some instances, breaks for movement and breathing may also be a good idea to introduce into the workplace environment, especially for evening and night shifts. Allowing individuals to get up, walk around, get the blood flowing, engage in some breathing exercises to reoxygenate their bodies may be as good or even better than taking a caffeine break. Some companies may even go as far as establishing napping protocols for safety critical roles. This may be especially important when shifts are long and demanding. Although safety should always be a priority, in certain instances there is little or no room for error. Napping protocols may be a good idea for those companies and individual employees. This is something that should be established as a protocol so that individual employees don't nap with the fear of getting in trouble or fight the urge to nap and sacrifice their performance and safety. When it comes to critical tasks or peak safety requirements, it makes sense that companies schedule such tasks for those times during one's shift where the individual is likely to be most alert. That could be at the beginning of the shift or at the very end of the shift. This is something that a company will do well to explore and implement. Such alertness peaks may also vary by individual. Management will do well to find out when individual employees feel most alert and most awake, especially if critical tasks are part of that individual's workplace experience. Ideally, this should be a collaboration, an open conversation between employee and employer. Managers should definitely work with fatigue risk checklists. As a manager, you should understand what tasks are most dangerous if fatigue comes into play. You should understand when during a shift the risk is greater because of fatigue, whether that's risk of errors, safety issues, or other underperformance. For individuals who do on-call work, where they may experience long periods of having to be awake and alert and available, an organization and a manager will do well to make sure that a post-on-call decompression period is established and adhered to. Individuals cannot be on call all the time, and a proper amount of time for resting is absolutely required. Individual employees must understand how to best recover and decompress after challenging schedules such as night work. Understand what your circadian biology requires of you when you're working against it because of work schedule requirements, and how to best recover for your individual needs. It's also important to have and engage in practices such as wind down routines so that you're able to go to sleep and get the rest that you need. Sometimes it may be difficult to fall asleep after coming home from working a night shift or an evening shift, but having proven routines in place can ease that transition from being awake and alert to winding down and going to sleep, getting the much needed rest. When it comes to working against your personal circadian biology, you may need to treat your work schedule and its effects like you would treat jet lag. Understand that there is a period of adjustment and allow yourself to have that transition period. This may be especially important when your work schedule includes rotating shifts. An organization absolutely must understand what shift work does to their employees, but also to their productivity and things such as safety or incident reports. Shift work may also cause a higher turnover. This is another thing that's important for organizations to recognize and understand. Any organization will do well to implement things that will improve the workplace experience for shift work employees. It's not difficult to put a plan in place where, for example, a 4-week trial may provide a picture of patterns and any changes that may come with updates, such as forward rotating shifts as opposed to backward rotating shifts. Both employees and employers can take it upon themselves to implement some of the best practices noted in this episode and gauge any changes or improvements that may come as a result. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Shift work may be necessary and may seem like a profitable option for many companies. The reality of shift work comes with lacking sleep and potentially sacrificed performance and safety. It is important to understand circadian biology as well as chronotypes, or a person's individual circadian biology, which may be somewhat different, where one individual may be a morning person, another may consider themselves to be a night owl. This is important to understand when considering shift work and how it affects employees, their performance, and company's safety. From forward rotating shifts to proper lighting to aligning alertness peaks with critical task windows, there are a number of things that organizations and managers can do to make shift work a better experience for everyone involved. Things such as fatigue risk checklists and post-on-call decompression periods can make shift work not only easier, but also safer and more productive. Individual employees can also be proactive in addressing their own experiences in terms of their circadian biology and how it relates to their work schedule. Best practices such as wind down routines can be tremendously helpful, and understanding that going against one's individual personal circadian biology should be seen as jet lag in many situations and treated as such. Reduced error rates, incident reduction, and retention in shift work roles should be every organization's goal. Employee and employer absolutely can come together to put some of these suggestions and best practices in place as a way of improving everyone's experience as it relates to shift work. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to consider sleep, circadian rhythms, and performance as they all relate to you and your experience. Whether you work in a management position or not, whether you experience shift work or not, there's room for consideration and improvement. How does your own circadian biology match with what is required from your job, from your employer? And how can you make it a better match with what you learned in this episode today? For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While you're there, check out some of the other videos. They focus on stress management. Stress Free with Dr. G is found on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.